My name is Marc Lamont Hill. I am the owner of Uncle Bobbie's Coffee and Books. Tonight, we are so lucky. We have one of the most important voices that we've had in hip-hop culture ever. One of the most important feminist voices, feminist critics, one of the most important journalists, and now someone who has documented one of the most important albums that hip-hop has ever seen, that pop culture has ever seen. And most importantly, Joan is my friend. I love Joan Morgan. She's one of my favorite people in the whole world. And when she told me she was writing a book, and then she told me she wrote a book, which was, I swear, like 48 hours difference. She's a genius. I said, you gotta come to Uncle Bobbie's. And she said, oh, I know, I'm definitely coming. And she kept her word. And she debuted this book earlier in the week. She tore Brooklyn up. And I said, you have to come to Philadelphia, and I guarantee you Philly's gonna show up for you. And I'm so grateful to you all for being here to show up for Joan, because this is a special book from a really special person, a really special voice. And I know y'all didn't come to hear me talk, so I am now gonna ask you all to give a warm round of applause to the scholar, the critic, the journalist, the award-winning author, Joan Morgan.
He's my friend.
Is it on? Did I turn it on? I think I turned it on.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Hello, Philly. This is nice.
It is nice, isn't it?
It is nice.
We got a
It's
whole
rainy day.
Yes, a rainy day, but it's worth it to come out to hear you talk about this book. I enjoy reading it so much.
Thank you, Marc.
You are really, in my estimation, the standard bearer for hip-hop journalism, and you have been since day one. But my favorite part about this book, if y'all don't know, Joan did, I don't know why you did this. She's a celebrated author, New York Times bestseller. Her book is read in all these classrooms. She could do anything she wanted. She decided to go back to grad school and get a PhD, which she'll be finishing any day now. Don't ask her the exact day, because the last thing anybody want to hear when they finish their PhD is when you're gonna finish. When it's done, you'll know. But what I love about this book is that you were able to take all of the best parts of academia, the rigorous thinking, the analysis, the transnational stuff we're gonna talk about. But I can still read this. Grad school didn't ruin your writing.
Well, you know, it was a big fear. It was a really big fear because when I got into the program, I'm at NYU in American Studies, and I'm an adult and I have a child who needs to eat and do things like go to college. And so I was a McCracken Fellow and I got a fellowship, but it's not enough living in New York City for me not to work. So I was like, yo, I gotta work. And they told me I could do certain kinds of work, but the one thing they asked me to do was to refrain from my public writing. And so I really felt for like the last 5 years or so that my voice was being strangled and stifled. I had a lot of insecurity. I was like, can I even still write? Because academia is a particular kind of, you know how like actors say commercials are a particular kind of bad acting that you have to master? That's what academic writing is.
Wow.
It's a particular kind of like bad writing that you have to master, which is, it doesn't really have a lot to do with voice. It has to do with, it's not so much about how you say it, it's
the performance.
It's the performance and getting it out. And I just don't write like that, so.
Thank God. Thank God. That's why When Chickenheads Come Home to Roost is a classic, because it was accessible and rigorous and thoughtful and field changing. Then you said, I'm going to write She Begat This. Talk to me about this book. Why did you choose to take this book on, of all things?
Well, I would say don't try this at home. You shouldn't, it was the worst circumstances to write a book under. I had to go tell my chair. So I know that we're supposed to have this like month-by-month plan to finish the dissertation, but I'm gonna take a couple months off and write this book real quick. So it was a couple of things. Some of them were very real world. My child chose a university in California that was a state university, and we're out of state. and then they gave us no financial aid.
Wow.
So my agent had called maybe a week or two before, and I had really been giving just very clear no's to her for years now with grad school, and something said to me, probably God, tell her you'll think about it, but don't make a decision yet. We got that tuition bill, and I was like, so, that book. But they, they wanted it, and now writing a book is so different. They were like, we need it in 4 months. I took 5, and that was really like a very big deal, because once they heard that she was going on tour, they wanted it on sale at the same time that the tour started. And so, I mean, what most people don't know about that book is I had a really amazing research assistant, Akisi Britton, Dr. Akisi Britton. But really, what I did was it took me 3 months to formulate the book, a month to write the first chapter, and the rest of the book was written in 10 days. I didn't proofread it. I literally, because I was teaching, and I'm writing faculty for young arts, so I would have days that started at 8 a.m. and ended at 10 p.m. And I would leave and I would go drink a lot of coffee and I would write until I was exhausted. And then I would just send pages as they were done. All I had time to do was spell check. So the last 3 chapters of the book are written in 10 days because your girl was not giving the advance money back.
I know that's right. Again, don't try this at home.
Don't try it.
This is like LeBron James telling us how he plays basketball. You know what I mean? Don't do this. But the book for me is special, partly because Lauryn Hill means so much to us. What did Lauryn Hill mean to you? And what did Miseducation mean to you? You started to talk about this in the first part of the book.
So, it actually goes back to the first question. There's the very real financial reason I needed to do it, but it was also when I thought about this book and the particular lens that I wanted to take with this book, I just knew that someone else could write a book on the miseducation, but no one was going to write the book that I was going to write. And I knew that, like, in my core. And whenever I really strongly feel that way, that the story I'm about to tell is my particular take on a story, then I feel very compelled to do it. I mean, it's the reason I wrote Chicken Heads. So I wasn't interested in, for me, Lauryn, I'm grown now, right? All of us are pretty much grown. So I'm not interested in knowing the real details of a girl who was 23 years old and in a relationship with her bandmate and what happened. And I didn't really care about necessarily the autobiographical details of her life.
Right.
For me, I had to really think, well, what do I think about this album? I don't play the Miseducation all the time. I'm never mad when I'm out and I hear it, but it really, for me, I realized, well, Lost Ones I'll always play, because to me, that's the classic. But it was like a really good friend from like college or high school that you still like, but y'all don't hang out anymore. But when you see each other, there's like good feelings, but they're not part of your day-to-day life anymore.
Yeah.
But when I thought about when the album dropped, it was 1998. That is the end of the 20th century. It is pre-Black Girl Magic. It is pre the digital age. It is the height of hip hop culture. And it's the height of my own anxiety as a woman in hip hop, feeling like, yo, am I gonna have to leave this thing that I helped build in terms of the culture? Because we're in the throes now of people understanding that misogynistic hip hop sells, right? Hip hop has become a $1 billion industry. And so I wanted to know, what does it mean now in 2018 to look back 20 years? For me, Lauryn was Black Girl Magic before the hashtag. She was actually Black Girl Magic before I wrote Black Girl Magic, because I was home listening to the Miseducation while I was writing Chicken Heads. I was listening to Zion when I was pregnant. And I realized a lot of the anxieties that I wrote about in When Chicken Heads Come Home to Roost, about relationships. Like, I realized, like, the 90s were the waiting to exhale decade. That's where we were. And now the 2018 is just waiting. It's just waiting. But I wanted to really look back and say, what happened to, the main theme of the album is love. What happened to Black love in the last 20 years? What were the political and structural changes that happened, the economic changes, the social changes, the cultural changes that got us from the miseducation to, let's say, lemonade? And so that was my lens.
Wow, that's a heck of a lens, and I think that's what makes the book so appealing to me. It wasn't celebrity gossip, it wasn't just a kind of traditional music journalistic review of an album.
Right.
You got us to a deeper level of understanding. But the first thing that struck me was when you told the story of being uptown at dinner and somebody a little bit younger than us was talking about this album. And she was like, yeah, it was all right. And the Bronx in you were able to subdue the Bronx in you and not jump across the table.
Yeah, you know, it's a hip-hop journalist thing when someone comes for your top 10 or your top 5, you're like, you get real froggy.
Right.
You know, but I was like, no, you're a journalist, so ask her why. I should say she's a little bit younger than you. She's a lot younger than me. But she basically, you know, I actually took my goddaughter out to dinner because I wanted an escape. Was playing this album over and over again, and I wanted to hear anything but Lauryn Hill. And I went out to dinner in Harlem, and apparently it was the DJ's favorite album because it was like all the tracks. It was like a Saturday afternoon barbecue and Lauryn Hill like mixed in over and over again. And so I was like, ugh. And my goddaughter laughed at me, and she was like, well, look where you are. Like, you are in a room of middle-aged people in Harlem. This is her demographic.
For sure.
You know, and so I asked her, did she still listen to the album? And she was like, well, I loved it when it came out, when I was like, I don't know, she said 12 or 13, but she found it very hotep-y.
Yes,
judgy.
that's where I want to go.
Those are the words that she used.
Hotep-y and judgy.
Yeah, like something that you should be sophisticated now to have grown out of. She found the thinking too binary,
right.
Basically.
It's like sitting next to your Willie Lynch letter or something. Right? Like, I mean, it's an interesting thing to think about though, because I don't think there was a world's bigger Lauryn Hill fan than me growing up, right? I loved Lauryn Hill, I loved the score, I loved Miseducation. I listened to Unplugged album as much as anybody humanly could, despite,
really?
Not because I liked it, but because that's how much I love Lauryn Hill. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, yeah, you really love Lauryn.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
That's my point.
Okay.
Them 3 chords on the guitar she played over and over again. But I think the thing that I found that I started to resent with Lauryn, that you engage in this book at the political level and at the romantic level, is this thing of, it's not just that Lauryn goes through changes. It's that Lauryn is so didactic at every stage. So when Lauryn changes, she'd be like, you should know better, you should be doing this, you should be doing, then she changes, like, you should be doing this, you should be doing, so by the time you get to Unplugged, she's in this whole different headspace, which is troublesome.
Right.
But it's different than she was on the score, it's different than she was in Miseducation. Is that just a product of the moment? The kind of 90s hip hop moment, or is that something particular to Lauryn, you think?
Well, I think it's both. I think that the Miseducation, I talked to Jason Jackson, who was Lauryn Hill's manager, and at the time a very close friend. And so he was really key in sort of walking me through the trajectory of Lauryn's creative process with the Miseducation and her career. And you know, what Jason said is that people read Miseducation as something that's anthemic. You know what I mean? That Lauryn had, like you said, gone through these things and come through these things, and it was prescriptive. And it actually wasn't that. She was in the height of her own very sort of complicated, messy relationship. So we know now the facts are she was in a relationship with Wyclef Jean, who was her bandmate and her producer, who had a full-time girlfriend that he married while she was in the Fugees. It was, and no one really knew about Lauryn, so in some ways they had this incredibly creative, productive, she was his muse. I think Wyclef was a very good producer for her. But it's that thing, you know, many women know this. It's like you're in this thing that seems like it should be perfect, but you're also dude's biggest secret. And the only way she could work through that, you got me on stage, you're my friend, you know how I do.
I'm just gonna drink my water.
Okay. You know, so don't be with men who compartmentalize that way, that's all I can say. But basically she was unseen. That part, that romantic part of them that was a huge part of it was not something that she, for whatever reasons, felt that she could publicly share with the world.
Yeah.
And her heartbreak, the only voice and outlet she had through that was her creativity. Like, they were broken up and still on the road together. So it was really hard. Like, she was at their wedding. So what we got to see, and Jason says it so brilliantly, is the miseducation is where Lauryn wanted to end up.
Okay.
And she was hoping through the writing and the songs that it would take her there.
Right. So Lauryn is writing these songs. She's almost like preaching to herself.
Right.
She wants to be the person on that album.
Right. And it's our assumption that she's doing that other thing, because when I really thought about the title and I think about the snippets, they're so instructive. It's the miseducation of Lauryn Hill, and there's that roll call, and Lauryn is absent. So whatever protected space that the rest of the kids are learning about love and being brought up in this wholesome environment and sharing and bonding, Lauryn is like, I gotta learn out in these streets and do it my way. Love doesn't look like this for me. It took me 20 years. So.
It took me 20 years plus this moment. Like, on today, I just learned this. Wow.
Yeah.
That's heavy. So that actually creates a space of forgiveness for me, I think. Because I think there's a way that we had an investment in Lauryn's growth and development because it was so anthemic, and because we all said, okay, this is who Lauryn is. She's this wonderful, developed, mature 23-year-old. When things fall for her, both musically and personally, I think we look to her like, wait, you had it together, now you don't. I almost found myself resenting the space she was in later. Because I demanded more from her because Miseducation put me in a place where I thought she knew better and did better.
Well, I think it's two things looking at it. I think that we as audience put an awful lot on the shoulders of a 23-year-old girl. Hip hop was in crisis. 96, Biggie was killed, Pac was killed. It was an incredibly violent time. Women were struggling for an articulation of how do I continue to love hip hop and love and respect myself. This is why I was like a little hard on my goddaughter, or wanted to be, because I want her to understand that this beautiful place where she can embrace her complexities, where you don't have to choose either or, that there's a whole generation of people who were living through it and building those theories at that time. There really is no queer studies, cisgendered, heteronormative, all of the things that we say now so freely, this is not our language in 1998. We're really trying to figure it out. This is pre-hip-hop feminism. And so I think with this generation, there's a real sort of like performance of wokeness, so that if you don't know these things, like, they tend to be very hard with each other. You know, they tend to want to like take each other out. And I find that they're not gentle enough with each other because they have the privilege of inheriting this thing that really we created. We created. And it took a lot of pain and a lot of trial and a lot of missteps to get there. You know what I'm saying? So I think that we put on Lauryn the incredible burden of saving hip hop. And then even after 5 kids, we wanted her to come back and save hip hop again. After imprisonment, we wanted her to do that. After a really public and kind of embarrassing legal dispute about how extensive her authorship really is. Like, she really went through some things. And we just were like, no, come back and save us. And for me, who is a black woman and a feminist and a huge fan of Zora Neale Hurston, and deeply resentful of this notion that it's black women's position and place in the world to constantly save everybody, I'm like, wow, we really turned around and did it to her.
So you think it's black women who put that pressure on? Yeah,
for sure. I think that we did it, and I think we did it from a place of love, but I also think that Lauryn bought into her own false stance as kind of prophetess. Right. So I think that we were feeding each other. I'm doing the collective black woman, like I never really saw her like that. But I think that when I look at we as a culture, I think that that's kind of what we did.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I think black men probably did that too, to a large degree. To sort of creating her as a kind of ideal type.
Right.
You know what I mean? You mentioned authorship, and that's an interesting thing because there's another thing that gets attributed to Lauryn Hill, which is a level of creative originality and ingenuity that other women MCs don't get. And you start to take that up in the book, this idea that, you know, Lauryn emerges against the backdrop of Kim and Foxy, against the backdrop against these other women MCs who are seen as talented, maybe even better in some people's eyes in terms of their performance, but they don't write their own stuff. That's the narrative. How important was the notion of authorship to Lauryn's kind of image as a legitimate MC, a top 5 MC, a legendary MC, all these things that get assigned to her?
Well, it was everything. You know, the 90s was a period that the common thought in the industry was you can't be a successful female MC unless you're backed by a male crew. So you're the female MC of the male crew, which was the case with Foxy, which was the case with Kim. Lauryn left her crew, you know, and at the time that she left, she also wrote for herself. She wrote for other members in her band. She helped to produce her other bandmates' records. There was no question. Also, because I am a hip hop journalist and a fan in aesthetics, and I'm really trained to listen to this past feelings, you can listen to Kim's rhymes and hear Biggie all over them. If you just listen to the rhyme scheme, it's there.
Right.
That's indisputable. You listen to Lauryn Hill, she don't sound like nobody else. There's nobody spitting like Lauryn at all.
There's no Wyclef in her voice.
There's no Wyclef in her voice.
Thank God. I love Clef. I think he's a genius. I'm a little tough on Prize. Tougher on Prize.
Everyone's a tough on Prize.
I don't know exactly what he does. I'm sure I think sometimes it's the glue. Like, you don't know what he does, but you know when they're together, it works, right? But there's this other moment where Lauryn goes from gets seen as, and you talk about this in the book, an extension of Clef's creativity, an extension of Clef's genius, as opposed to the other way around.
You know, I heard that. But this is part of the reason why I have to do the research the way that I did, because I realized would have been really easy for me to write this from the point of like an industry insider.
Right.
And our point of view is like really skewed. So, you know, in Brooklyn it was like me, Michaela Angela Davis, Kierna Mayo, and we were all like, Yahoo was like, I didn't know she was in a relationship with Wyclef, and we were like, huh? Like, how did you not know? So I think that what I remember was everybody was just waiting for her to drop the dudes. They couldn't wait for Lauryn to go solo. It was like, she's the best thing about this group. When is she just gonna, and I think that was part of the tension, at least as Jason explained to me, is that they all had an agreement that they would work on each other's stuff, and she worked on all of the dudes.
Yeah.
I think even she might have even worked on John Forte's album, and I think that Clef knew that once he worked on Lauryn's stuff, she would probably be done, and so he never fulfilled that promise. So when she left, I think that's why she was so committed to, I'm gonna write, produce, sing, rap, the whole nine. That's why that credit was so important to her.
Yeah. Lauryn wasn't just a musical icon, she was a cultural icon.
Yeah.
From the magazine covers, I think about the Honey one. I mean, we're going down the list of things, and the posters, the images. What did she mean to broader popular culture aesthetically?
Well, I mean, this is, to me, Lauryn, one of the large reasons I wanted to write the book is because she is actually as much as a visual and cultural intervention as she is a musical one. So again, we're in this space now where Gucci models have teeny tiny afros, and Yves Saint Laurent models are rocking like cornrows, and not cornrows with extensions. I mean, like, you know, what in my day were hood cornrows,
right,
that I rocked, you know? And it's you can, I looked out in this audience, I look out in the Brooklyn audience, and there's a range of textures and hairstyles, and I rocked a season in the 90s. This is pre a natural hair movement. There are no YouTube videos talking you through it. You know, when you made a decision at those days to wear your hair naturally, there was also, you were also burdened with people's assumptions about your politics and your aesthetics. Like, we really wanted to lock people into certain places. Also, Lauryn wasn't the only girl who looked like she did. I mean, you could walk around Fort Greene and find a dozen Lauryns. But the fact was that she was absolutely stunning. She came into the industry on her own terms. This is the height of the celebrity stylist now, where people, it's ghetto fabulousness. So people are saying, get me Balenciaga, get me Louis Vuitton, get me Gucci. And Lauryn basically, the way that when I interviewed people, like, she was like, yeah, I don't want anyone styling me. This is what I want, and you can instruct me in where to get it, but my look and my aesthetic is mine. And so she showed up and she became like a Beyonce level superstar, but never with any kind of deference to whiteness. She did that in her own black body, and what she was saying to black and white magazines was, do not believe the lie that this is not marketable, that this is not beautiful, that this is not desirable. And so she was the light bulb moment for many people. Like, I was a huge fan of Harper's Magazine. I mean, I was a magazine journalist for many years, so magazines were kind of my thing. And I loved Harper's Bazaar. It had a legendary editor-in-chief, Liz Silberis, who's passed away. It was the whitest thing on the planet.
Yeah.
Lily white. Like, the writers were white, the models were white, it just was white. And so when Lauryn showed up on its cover, and then was like, so it's gonna be me and like a dozen little black and brown kids like sitting around me with those dreadlocks. Like, people don't realize in this moment that for us the world stood still, because it was like a whoosh.
Right, it was stunning. I want to pivot a little bit, and by the way, we're going to create space for question and answer. So everybody, if you have a question, start to formulate it now, so you can translate it into an actual question. And we'll come to your questions in a few minutes. I don't get to steal this much time with Joan, so it's good when I can. I'm thinking about the music again for a moment. Because one of the questions people ask when they talk about the classicness of Miseducation is whether it holds up today.
Yeah.
Does it hold up today?
Okay, so I always say these things are super subjective. It depends on who you ask. You ask Dream Hampton in the book, she'll tell you no, and it didn't hold up then. She's very clear about that. Because she doesn't think Lauryn is a strong producer.
Right.
And she's probably not. Frankly, the production is probably, I think Dream is right. When I went back and listened to it, I was like, okay, Clef's a stronger producer. It would have been nice if they were in a place where he actually could have worked on the album. Like, I think he might have pushed her to make some different kinds of choices that would have been really aesthetically pleasing.
He might have scrapped some of them songs though.
Yeah.
Like, this Lost Ones ain't gonna work.
Well, yeah, no. Well, Lost Ones was never meant to be on the album.
Say more about that.
It's spoiler alert. Okay, so for most people, how many people thought Lost Ones was like the first single on that album? Let me just see your hands. Yeah, but then I went back and I was like, why is there no video for Lost Ones? Like, this doesn't make sense. It's because it was not the first single. Do Up That Thing was the first single.
Right.
And so what happened—
But Lost Ones hit the radio first, right?
Lauryn was working on it diligently. Hello, my family trying to sneak in late. This is my niece walking in. Hi, Terry Ann.
The shade of it all. You could have let her walk in. You know, y'all gonna see this.
My family trying to act like, okay.
We love you, Terry Ann. Don't, you ain't gotta put up with this.
So, you know, she's Columbia. So at the time, as Jason explained to me, the Roots were doing what they were doing. And so that was the score, and the Roots were the bar for Columbia and Sony in terms of sales. And so they thought too, Lauryn is the dopest thing about the Fugees. We want the Fugees without the guys, basically. And so, you know, there's very little hip hop on this album. Like, she was really going in another direction. And I think that, and many of the things she did are incredible. Like, Lauryn, at a time where people don't really understand black music as like a global phenomena in the industry, really positioned herself both musically and physically as a citizen of the Black diaspora, and she just drew from different forms and different Black aesthetics at will. And that's part of the power of the Miseducation. But for me, the dopest stuff on there is when she's rhyming. Like, when you ask me if this is a classic album, when I look back and I hear the rapping, I'm like, this stands the test of time forever and ever. There's stuff on the album that I like won't play all the way through. Again, if I was out and I heard it, I wouldn't be like, this is whack. But I think that we still haven't gotten that classic rap album from Lauryn yet. Right. And that doesn't take anything away from it, but I think the tension at the time is that it got lauded at, it won the same year that Lauryn won all of those awards at the Grammys, is the same year Jay-Z boycotted for its treatment of hip hop. So the fact that they lauded that as a hip hop album and safe was also a complicated move by the industry about what was palatable to pass as hip hop. So I never felt like it was a hip hop album. But that's not a critique of it. I just don't think it falls into that category.
But it does stand the test of time for you.
No, I don't play it. I play like certain things. Like I'll play, I love Zion. I have a really personal attachment to that because, when I researched this, I realized a lot of people were pregnant in 98 and 99. Like a lot of people were, like a lot of people were pregnant.
Yeah.
And pregnant in complicated ways.
Right.
So I was too young at that time to understand that pretty much, most people are pregnant in complicated ways. Like we all, whether that's like, I'm at this point in my career, or I don't think in this point in our relationship we should be having it. There's no ideal way to do this. That's just part of the narrative that we feed people about the right way.
Yeah.
And I think Black women in particular get fed a very strong narrative about the right way to do it. The person who told me that when I first started, I ended up leaving her like during the pregnancy. But before that, I had a very Park Avenue white gynecologist, OBGYN. Like she wore a Chanel lab coat.
Oh, I didn't know they existed.
On every side. And she was the one who told me and I was like, oh, my career and the book is dropping and I'm pregnant, and I had a very difficult medical issues with my pregnancy. So for the first 6 months they didn't know if Soleil was gonna live, really. And they were really trying to encourage me to abort, and I wouldn't do it. And so that song took on, that became like my anthem in many ways. And I think that it became anthemic for a lot of women that way. Lost Ones to me is always going to stand the test of time because it is just it's not even a battle record, because a battle record would mean that you could fix your face to come up with a response.
Right.
It's like an ultimate diss record to me.
To Wyclef,
To
right?
Wyclef. Yeah. From Hopeless to Hope Road, it was like, you're a wannabe Marley, and now I'm a Marley.
No, right.
Right.
Hope Road is the Marley studio in Jamaica.
So I think there are moments on there that, like X Factor, that line about tell me who I have to be to get some reciprocity is something that unfortunately plays way too often in my mind. I think Black women have to ask that question over and over and over again in different ways. And so there are things in there to me that have a real resonance. But for me, a classic album means that I'm gonna play it. I will play Tribe Called Quest Scenario from beginning to end and loop it and loop it and loop it and loop it, and then have the experience of my son being 12 at the time and discovering Fife's voice for the first time and losing his mind. That to me is a classic hip hop album.
Yeah.
So yeah, for me it's not like I'm like, oh, we thought it was dope, but it's really not, it really isn't, it was whack. Unplugged was whack. But this wasn't,
Right.
This really wasn't. And let me say something about Unplugged. Because this was something that was really important to me in the album for people to realize. I think I don't like Unplugged. I think musicians should learn how to play an instrument before you do an entire album.
Before you do a concert.
Right. But the thing about Unplugged is that we're really unfair to Lauryn in many senses. It wasn't meant to be her second album. Most artists that get asked, MTV Unplugged is a particular vehicle that's given to people who have, or at the height of their career, and most of them are good 3-4 albums in.
Yes.
Think about how much music Kurt Cobain did before he did Unplugged.
Or Jay-Z.
Or Jay-Z. Lauryn had one album. And so she said, okay, I'm over that. I'm certainly over him. I got a new man who probably don't want to hear me, you know, on TV, singing about my last relationship. Let me give you something new. But because we never got the second album, it becomes weighted as the second album. And it's looked at as a massive critical failure and commercial failure. And really, it's just a snapshot of her creative process at the time. So I don't like it, but I don't think it's a big deal I don't like it. Like, because if she had done something right after that, I probably would have loved it.
Right.
Yeah.
You wouldn't think about it the same way.
Yeah.
At that time, she was also doing some other stuff that you talk about in the book, some of her production. Rose to the Rose, some other, you know.
Yeah, she was producing for a lot of people. I think, so Aretha Franklin, CeCe Winans, she was doing it also really pregnant, like super, super pregnant. She had, according to people I talked to, an incredible work ethic that way. You know, she was really just driven to succeed on her own terms. So I'm not ever going to make the argument that Lauryn Hill is not a good producer. I think it takes a special kind of quality to produce yourself.
Yeah.
It's like every writer needs an editor. And so I think like musicians always benefit from an outside ear. But she's incredibly talented in ways that we don't give her a lot of public credit for.
How much of that is gendered? I remember there was a Vibe article where she was talking about working with Aretha, and Aretha was telling her these stories about working in the 70s at Columbia, and how, you know, she would be arranging and writing, and people never gave Aretha credit for her genius as a musician, not just as a vocalist. Lauryn said that resonated with her a great deal. Is this a gender thing, or is this a hip-hop thing? Do we not appreciate just hip-hop genius in that way?
No, I think part of it is gendered, but I also think what's specific to the industry, not the culture of hip-hop, is it's a billion-dollar success. So once you become successful doing one thing, that's what people want you to do. Lauryn was a Lupita moment way before Lupita. So people didn't love things where they couldn't see her. You know, as a producer, when you're producing another talent, that's a very sort of behind the scenes kind of thing, and it's not particularly marketable for a record company that is really invested. We didn't call it that, but now what we call it is brand. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Before we go to the audience, I got two more questions for you. One is hip-hop feminism. I can see your face already, like, I don't know.
No, it's not that. I'm like, okay, it's big.
No. What does how is Lauryn Hill instructive to us in terms of how we can imagine what a hip-hop feminism is? How is it helpful for you, helping you think through hip-hop feminism?
It wasn't, it's funny because I read some really bad, like, unauthorized autobiographies of her, and people wrote about her as a feminist. People wrote about her as a feminist. And even as I was doing they were trying to figure out what the marketing was gonna be, people would say to her, you know, she's one of the early feminists, and I would say very frankly, she's not.
Not feminist or not early feminist?
She's not a feminist. Like, never have you heard Lauryn Hill call herself a feminist. To me, the idea of marking, there are women who I think get down in very feminist ways, and we may not call them that.
Yeah.
But when I look at Beyonce, this is going to be very controversial for some people, apologies in advance. But when I look at Beyonce, who takes a public stance of being a feminist, right?
Yeah.
Who hires all female band, who makes sure is that her dancers are, when Beyonce comes out and does a concert, the first thing she does is she looks around and she talks about how beautiful that audience is, and she tells the women to slay. It's not just I'm beautiful, it's come be beautiful with me. Lauryn stands as a single entity. We don't, she's like Liv. Like, we don't know on a Scandal, we don't know who Liv's homegirls are. We like, girls, do you have any black friends? Like, who are your people? Lauryn whether or not that it was her intention or in her privacy, we think of her through a very male lens and stepping away from it, but not necessarily creating something where we see her in the company and the harmony of other women. And I don't assign feminism to me, feminism is a verb, it's not just a label. So I don't know what her praxis is. I'm not critiquing her for it, but I'm also not going to just assign it to her. To me, I would not have had such a difficult time articulating a hip-hop feminism if there was a black woman of Lauryn's stature in the music industry who actually declared herself a feminist. Hip-hop Chicken Heads would look like a very different book.
Wow.
That's 1998. Chicken Head drops 1999. And I think the reason that hip-hop feminism, now I can look back and say, takes up that space is because it's the space between what we saw in Lauryn and then an actual theoretical kind of praxis about how we can function in this space. Yeah.
My last question is real easy. We can't have this conversation without me asking you. Because somebody gonna ask you anyway. What's your top five?
Top five.
Yeah. Gotta ask.
I don't know, it changes. I feel like it changes every time I come to Philly. So I think Lauryn is really one of the best MCs to ever do it. I think Jay, up until the point where he fake retired, like I really think the Black Album should have been the last album, right?
Wow.
Because now he's just like weirdly the old man at the club, you know? But I think Jay at that point is absolutely one of my favorites at time. Rakim always occupies that position because without Rakim, Rakim like gave us the permission to create different kinds of flow.
Yeah.
KRS-One is not one of my, like I don't want to listen to anything that Chris does now, but at the time, I think
including talking.
Right, I think he gave to hip hop what James Baldwin gave to the essay. It's that it's such a conversational, instructive kind of, he set a bar that he was the preacher and the teacher, and I think that a lot of people have come out and tried to emulate that.
Wow.
I really have to say this because he'll be really mad if I don't. But for number 5, I think Tip.
I was about to say.
Yes.
You better say Tip.
I'm gonna say Tip. But you know, Phife really rivals him. I think they're neck and neck for me for different reasons.
Wow.
Yeah. And as soon as I leave, I'll go, I should have said, but
exactly.
In this moment, that's how I feel.
And you're in Philly, and there's a lot of Black Thought people in here who are very angry right now. I just want to point that out. They're being polite right now. There's some Biggie people and some Black Thought people, and there's some Nas people.
Oh, big! Okay, let me say. 5.
KRS-One got to go.
Yeah,
I'll make that easy for you.
He gotta go. See, now, the Notorious B.I.G., that first album, that's a classic album.
It's perfect.
It's perfect. It's perfect yesterday, it's perfect today, it will be perfect 20 years from now. That is a classic album. There's not a damn thing wrong with that album.
Right. I think part of it comes down to how we understand what a classic is too, right? Is it an album that's timeless, or is it an album that defines a moment? Because like the score defines a moment, Miseducation defines a moment, but it ain't perfect by any stretch.
The score defines a moment, but a lot of the reasons people love Lauryn has a lot to do with the classicness of the score.
Yeah, I think so.
You know?
I think so.
Absolutely.
And I try to listen to the score, and I have to fast forward so much.
Really?
I only want to listen to 1/3 of every song. Occasionally 2/3.
Yeah, no, I can put that on. I don't necessarily crave it, but when it's on, I'm really happy.
I'll take that.
But listen, Caribbean American girl living in Brooklyn in the night, like I'm hardwired for this. Right.
I'm sorry, I gotta ask you this, and I promise this is my last question. Transnational blackness. That's some very domestic blackness right there. Obviously you're thinking about this stuff through as you do your dissertation, as you think about in the scholarly realm, all that. Lauryn does something for how we thought about transnational blackness, I think, right? And in the first chapter of the book, second chapter of the book, maybe you start to talk about how Lauryn is picking from these different spaces of Haiti, Jamaica. You said this stuff wasn't playing in her house growing up, yet she was able to bring it in some ways, mainstream it.
Oh yeah, I said there's no ackee and saltfish cooking in the Sunday mornings of her childhood. Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, so this is my stance. Today's hip hop's 45th birthday. Speaking of Philly, Amir let everybody know on Instagram that it was hip hop's 45th birthday. Questlove. And I shout out to the yard man, to the Jamaican who created that.
Right.
You know? And so for me, hip hop has always been a Caribbean American art form. You cannot extract the Caribbean and have hip hop. And I don't even just mean that in terms of the music. I mean all of those Puerto Rican b-boys. I mean, there's no Hart-Celler Immigration Act in 1968. You do not have hip hop. And so I'm proudly claiming the Jamaicanness in that, because I'm Jamaican and we're fiercely nationalists. But you know, I was there. So to me, there's also the score without Salaam Remi.
Yes.
Salaam Remi is the Caribbean American producer who realized there were all these artists, you know, because what has happened now is you've had a long enough period of time where you've had a generation come through. So it's 30 years, right? And so people now have gone to school with kids whose parents are from different places, and blackness looks different in the classrooms. Like, you can go to, in the 90s, it's nothing to go to a party and hear hip hop and reggae. Prior to that, in the 70s, if you wanted to hear Jamaican music, you went to school, you went to parties with Caribbean people. They were not playing them, your American friends were not playing that. I still remember poignantly the day that the first time Bob Marley was played on Black American radio. And it was the day that he died, and Frankie Crocker said, "I'm going to do it."
Wow. So it was like a thing.
Oh, it was a thing. The Marleys were the biggest act in the world at that time, and the only way that they could play America was to open for the Commodores. To open for the Commodores. And Bob said, "I will do it because play I on the R&B, I want all my people to see. I want to bubble on the top 100. Because he could do it in Africa, he could do it all over the world, and he could not penetrate the Black American market. So we have come from a very different space. A lot of things politically and culturally had to happen to allow the dance hall explosion of the 1990s. And Salaam Remi says, yeah, I came. It took someone like Salaam Remi, who was equally American and equally Caribbean, to say sonically, how do I translate? He used to call himself, I gave those Jamaican artists the visa that they needed to come over and have that moment in the United States. You don't have that moment, you have no score, you have no the Miseducation.
Wow.
And so for me, what was beautiful about Lauryn is I think she understood that, which is why we get that gorgeous sonic play throughout the Miseducation. If you really listen to Lost Ones, there's so much patois that she drops on there, but she just doesn't say it with a Jamaican accent. I think she really got it, and she was way ahead of her time in getting it, and she just wore it. Like Michaela Angela Davis talks about that, the sort of Jamaican khakis, the military wear. You know, she wasn't dressing like an I3 necessarily. You know, she was sort of taking rude boy aesthetics and flipping it in this gorgeous sort of feminine kind of way. She was looking to Ethiopia. She was looking all over the continent to kind of pull it back to say, this is the power of blackness. Yeah. This is the power and the globality. And you know, she wasn't reading Paul Gilroy, I don't think.
Probably not.
So.
Just genius.
Just genius.
That's it.
So I think we owe her a lot.
We owe her so much. Questions, audience questions. Why don't we do this? Why don't we have a microphone set up? Why don't people come over to the microphone? Just so that people can hear you. We're live streaming this on Facebook Live.
Testing.
So I want.
Oh no, please ask.
They can't see you, Aisha, I promise. They can't see you. It's gonna be up here on
us. Okay, this is a question, I promise. Did you at any point wonder or think in the back of your mind, maybe Lauryn is fetishizing or exoticizing a tiny bit? Did you ever wonder throughout your time?
Fetishizing what?
Just, I guess, in her appreciation of the diaspora of blackness, right? In her creation of art. Did you ever just have a moment in your mind? And I mean, obviously I have to admit I think I was either 14 or 15 when the album came out, but I was even younger when the earlier Fuji albums, came out. And I think like as someone who's Haitian American and grew up in Haiti, I think I understood just kind of like having a very Caribbean feel, right, throughout the albums. And then I just assumed that Lauryn was also Caribbean herself.
Yeah, people still think that.
And then when I learned that she wasn't, I was like, oh, okay, that's cool, she appreciates it. And it's like, is she kind of like exoticizing? I don't know. Just wondering if you ever...
I wouldn't be able to answer that, but I would say she liked the men that she liked, and she met them very young. So she's in a band with with Haitians. She's in love with a Haitian. She leaves that Haitian and jumps out of the frying pan into the fire with Marley. And I don't think, people don't really kind of understand what it means to, at 23 years old, become a Marley. Like in Jamaica, they are royalty.
Yeah.
They are absolute royalty, and the Marleys walk through the world in a particular kind of way. I could have told you she was probably going to have 5 kids, for sure.
Right.
So I think that there was something and I couldn't identify it for you, that she was attracted to and reached for outside of herself with that. But I also don't think it's completely divorced from the men that she chose. Yeah.
Other questions?
So thank you for writing with Chicken Heads, and also for your commentary on the comparison of Beyonce and Lauryn Hill. And that's sort of where my question is. You mentioned the context in which Lauryn produces Miseducation, and how that informs how the limits, I guess, of what she's able to express, and also a similar thing with Beyonce. And this was in the conversation now, but also in an article that I read, you did an interview with the Paris Review. My question is, why do you feel like I don't necessarily disagree with your reading of Beyonce as a feminist and Lauryn Hill not, but I'm really curious as to why we feel it's necessary and or important to make that type of a statement.
In 1999 or right now?
Right now,
Okay.
at a moment when feminism has taken on this mainstream dialogue and presence, and it looks like a particular thing coming from Beyonce. And I don't know that was necessarily the conversation in a mainstream way that was happening when Lauryn was at her highest point, at her peak.
So I'll just be really frank with you. I have really good homegirls who love me to death. It probably took them 12, 13, 14 years to be chicken heads. Like, you know how they found out? They were like, oh my God, someone would say to them, you're the person Joan thanks in the acknowledgements. Isn't your mom in the book? And they'd be like, oh my God, you thank me in the acknowledgements? I'd be like, it's 10 years later, you still ain't read that book? They were very concerned. They really were like, this is your moment. Think of your career, they said, Joan, use your head. Black women are not really checking for feminism like that. Why would you use your first book to have a book on black women and feminism? Like, there's so much more you can write about. They were scared for me. So this moment we're like, and I'm not saying you're saying this, but we're like, oh, it's so mainstream among black women. 1999, to even be black and young, and let alone be into hip hop and declare yourself a feminist, very different territory. I'm very glad I did that, and I'm very glad I wrote the book, because the daughters of those girls knew they were red chicken heads at 13, 14, 15 years old, and came out the gate feminists. So the way that they're moving through the world, the way that Yara Shahidi is not going to give us a miseducation. And that is the importance of declaring yourself a feminist.
Hello. I just wanted to say thank you for being that hip-hop feminist back then. In 98, I think I was just graduating high school, 96, and Lauryn, came out on the score immediately. Like, even from the first Fugees album, I was just like, yeah, I want to hear more. I don't care about anything else the guys are doing. And then with me, like, listening to the score, I just go back and listen to all Lauryn's parts. Like, Marc, I'm trying to figure out why Krause was there, but glad he was, he added to it some kind of way. But yeah, I just want to say thank you for that. Being in that space, I'm wearing my hip hop Joan shirt because I knew I was that person. I just didn't have any words for what it was back then. And I had missed that female presence, how we were kind of just like dying out, it seemed, in hip hop. So I am glad for the ladies who are around today. I hope there's more of us to come out of that. So I have a question kind of about how the book isn't necessarily about Lauryn, but has she co-signed anything? Have you had any connection to her, either in any of the articles and things you've done previously, but more importantly about this writing?
So, to answer your second question, I did a cover story on her for Essence, I think about 10 years ago. That was the rumor of the Fugees reunion album that we know didn't happen. And so I was very frank with my editor when he asked me if I would do this. I said, you're giving me 4 months to write the book. I will not write this book if you require me to talk to Lauryn Hill. One, I've already interviewed her. And so besides, and I'm answering this question because you're asking me, but it's not in the book because I don't necessarily think at the end of the day it's the most important thing about her. But she's a celebrity, and all celebrities have to be rankled. All celebrities are extremely concerned about their image. They're extremely concerned about their representation, and I wanted this book in service of a particular cultural moment and not in service of Lauryn Hill. And so I said, plus I was like, you're only giving me 4 months to write it. It's gonna take me 4.5 months to sit down with her. As somebody who was supposed to showed up in New York one day to interview her and ended up staying there 2.5 weeks, waiting for her to show.
Same thing when you go to a concert.
There you go. So yeah, and I think having her voice in muddies it. That's why I decided to refrain about writing about her personal life. I'm really clear about that. One, because I think that in the era that it's created, it's a different time than now. We don't feel like we have in the 90s the right and access to celebrities' personal lives all the time, 24/7. We actually like a little bit of mystery about our celebs, that we're in a very different moment right now. But I felt like having her voice in at all meant that it would muddy what my intention was in terms of making it a cultural history. Like, people would really be concerned about what Lauryn's particular truth was. And I actually, you'll see when I sign these books, I signed them, we begat this, because we begat the era, along with Lauryn, that allows for the present cultural moment.
Sister right there. But once again, you can
So there, you must have an opinion though on what happened. I think we all have some speculation about what may have turned Lauryn away from the music business in a certain particular way. But in writing the book, did you develop any additional theory about what happened to her in terms of being the artist that was in a certain particular place of visibility, or why she didn't go ahead and record more albums? I mean, she's basically touring off of one album and has been for years.
Yes.
So do you, or did anything that you researched in the book give you a sense of what she may have been thinking about continuing her career in the same kind of way going forward?
when I finally got to sit with Lauryn, what was immediately clear to me is that Ms. Hill is a very different incarnation than the L Boogie that people fell in love with on the Miseducation. So the kind of vulnerability that you would need to create the Miseducation is not at all Ms. Hill. I received very clear instructions that she was not to be hugged, you were not to shake her hand, you would address her as Ms. Hill. I was like, fine, I'm older than her, so she has to call me Ms. Morgan. But that was a real kind of, it was a very difficult article to write because there was a kind of unraveling going on that I felt really like, is no one in her camp concerned that not everything feels right, like right now? And I think that Sony had invested a lot of money in that second album and they wanted a product. And I don't think at the time that I interviewed her that she was capable of doing that. I think that this is pre-tax evasion charges. It was coming off the, a really public, she had 2 lawsuits actually. The one with the guys with Newark and then someone else who she did a Rose is Still a Rose claim that she stole some of the music from him. And there was this public pressure to say, come back and perform. You're our priestess, you're our goddess. She also has a bunch of kids. I have 1 kid, and I wrote my first book 19 years ago, published it. My son is 19. There's a reason the second one is coming out now. She has 5 children. So I think that there are a lot of changes that make her not necessarily the L Boogie that we fell in love with. And I don't know that she trusts us enough to think that we will accept what it is that she puts out now. I have heard from a number of people close to her that she has a tremendous amount of music, that if she wanted to drop like 2 or 3 albums a day, she could.
But do you think that any part of it was, and as we saw with Biggie, with Prince, with Michael Jackson, that there was part of her that was like, I don't want that. I don't want anything to come to that. Because when she came out 20 years ago, everything was on her. She was, like you said, the high priestess to save the world, music and everything else. Do you think that there was anything inside of her that was like, I'm gonna cut myself off from being all that and just go over here, raise these kids and be by myself and not be bothered with any of the celebrity stuff?
Yeah, she says that.
Real quick, the question, just for our Facebook stream, they couldn't hear the question. The question was, is there any part of Lauryn that said, I'm just gonna leave that world alone, I'm gonna raise my kids, I'm gonna not be part of this world that wants me to be a high priestess and there's all these expectations and there's all the drama attached to it?
She didn't articulate it to me that clearly, but she did articulate that the pressure of it was too much. This, in every breath, people talk about her music. The second thing, or it may be the first thing they're going to talk about, is her beauty and her image. And so the idea of not being able to go to the grocery store and just be herself, like I don't think she was ever in love with celebrity. She was very in love with being an artist, but I don't think that she is a celebrity that fell in love with celebrity, and that was really hard. And a friend of mine actually came to the book signing, and I had no idea while I was working on the book that this was true. And I'm glad that I made the decision not to talk to Lauryn, because she lives in Lauryn's neighborhood. She sees Lauryn at PTA meetings all the time. She's like, she's hardcore a mom. And that is what she wanted to be. And so I don't know what the actual stipulations are of her recording, performing the music from the Miseducation, if they're related to the lawsuit, that you can't perform them as they are, whatever, without crediting so-and-so, which may be why we get these sped-up versions, or,
that would explain.
So I think that I think it's all kind of connected in a way that we're not particularly privy to, but I do think there are reasons, and they're not solely attributed to like her insanity, which is why I think a lot of people become very dismissive of her.
Is that the final story of Lauryn? Do you think that this narrative of decline, that she was a brilliant artist who went crazy and started making bad music? Because that seems to be like the dominant narrative. And I agree with you that that's not an accurate one, but is that the final story of Lauryn?
I mean, I think if there is all that music and it's ready to go, I haven't seen her live because I really need my artists to show up on time. That's just me. I mean, if someone else is paying for the ticket, I'll definitely go. But if I'm spending my money on a ticket, you gotta come and perform. I don't know. I gotta go to my job on time. So I feel like that's a fair ask. I'm not into the artiste thing.
I could deal with 20 minutes, 30. Hip hop rules say if the show started at 7, it started at 8, maybe 9, if it's an opening act. But if I wait 4 hours and then you show up,
okay, yeah, but not at like the London Opera House.
That's true.
You know what I mean?
That's fair.
That's fine when hip hop was like, you at Wetlands in some tiny ass little venue,
right,
waiting for someone to go exchange. But you playing out major stadiums and arenas. I'll say this. When we first started to go see live music, a concert ticket might have been $50, and that was a big deal. When people are shelling out hundreds of dollars,
that's true.
It is the ultimate respect to your fans to come, show up, perform on time, and give them everything. So that I'll say that. A lot of people felt like, we should just, she's an artist. So what? Everybody's late. Everybody is not late.
Not like that. Yeah, that's real.
Everybody's not late. So I don't know, Marc. I am really excited for this moment because if the new music exists, what better moment than now? On her, she hasn't done so in such a long time that anyone who has no reasonable person should expect her to make the Miseducation 2 20 years later. Right. I think that we have had enough time to give her enough artistic breath to accept it, and we miss her so much that we're like, all right, I'm just gonna buy it. You know what I mean? So I think that if this is the moment, if we're going to see something different.
I hope it is.
I do too.
We got time for one more question? I think how many hands are up? Who has a question? Raise your hand if you have a question. Since there's no line, it's hard to tell. All right. We got 3, so we'll go here.
Hi. For me, the Miseducation of Lauryn Hill was the greatest album of all time at that time in my life, because it addressed a lot of issues that I saw or I was dealing with, and it also spoke to a lot of social justice issues that I was working on or friends of mine were working on. So in terms of that aspect of hip hop and hip hop culture and looking at today, do you feel hip hop now addresses current social issues, for example, immigration and xenophobia and the Me Too movement?
I don't listen to contemporary hip hop. That's honest. Like as a 24-year-old, I was like, I am not going to be the 40-year-old music critic. The fact that I was still talking about chicken heads at 40 was like really really? How did this happen to me? I feel like this generation is doing really interesting things that they are much better qualified to talk about than me, because I'm just sonically like really not that interested. Yeah.
That's a good answer. Yeah, we're gonna end with the sister. Let's let this brother go. Maybe you can have the last word.
I wonder if you heard the Revisiting the Nina Simone tribute album that Lauryn Hill did, and if so, if you had an opinion, and do you see the parallel between Lauryn Hill and Nina Simone?
Oh yes.
It ends. The last chapter in the book is Was She Our Nina Simone? So I do spend a lot of time. So I just want to make a point before we close out. I made a very deliberate choice about who I was going to interview for the book. So the book, 95% of the experts in the book are Black women who were either hip hop journalists or cultural critics at that time, or scholars who are talking about Black women and Black women's issues today. And the reason that I did, and DJs, Black female DJs. And the reason that I did that is that so often with hip hop, people like me, people like Kieran Amayo, people like Karen Good, we get called in as the female voice to give a little diversity to what the assumption that hip hop history is best told through a male narrative. And I believe that all of these women were there. We were in the trenches. Yes. We were creating culture. And so I wanted to use a book that honored our voices and our perspectives and our talents. And I dropped in like 1 or 2 men when I needed them, which is kind of what they did to us for like 20 years in terms of the critique. So, you know, I really would have loved if Lauryn had played Nina Simone as opposed to Zoe Saldana. I mean, I think it was a really beautiful vehicle for her. There was a vehicle, I heard, that people were really interested in doing that with her. And then I think it's either she was pregnant, so she wasn't available. I think it's a very natural comparison, but there's some really diverse perspectives about it in the book. Some people feel like, absolutely, that's like a no-brainer, she's our Nina Simone. And other people, Dream had a really great point, was that when we crown people like D'Angelo is our next Marvin Gaye, or Lauryn Hill is the Nina Simone, we put too much on young artists and don't allow them to grow. We forget that Marvin Gaye created 5 albums before what's going on. And so I think I fall in the camp that the comparisons to Nina Simone have been incredibly restrictive and probably not the best thing for an artist who's struggling to come out with another product.
Thank you, that's right.
Joan, thank you so much for this. Thank you for writing Chicken Heads. It was the first book that I read by a Black woman in undergraduate, during my undergraduate education time. So thank you for that, because it helped me figure out who I was, a little loud Black girl from the south side of Chicago. My question is about how we understand or make sense of what albums are classic and what albums are timeless, and how we think about that. When you said like, well, I don't listen to it all the way through, I thought, oh my God, I can put on the Miseducation, listen to it from start to finish. And I wonder how much of how we understand classics or timeless albums are tied to our gender, our class, the moments in time that we connect to those creations. And so just how much of who we are in our I'm a sociologist, demographics, are related to how we understand what are timeless things and what are classics.
Yeah, it's really interesting because there was another track that I said that I wouldn't do with the book, that generally when these books are done, they're not cultural histories. They're really music geek, nerdy things. Yes. They go track by track. People track down the producers. They want to know what was happening in the studio at the time. I don't really care. I wrote about music for 20 years as an excuse to write about culture. I think every music review that's ever written is subjective. There's no such thing as a definitive music review because music is subjective. So I think even the question of what makes a classic album is a fun thing, like who's your top 5, but ultimately a really irrelevant one. There's no bar that we're going to be able to set that says these albums are classic and these are not. It is completely your point of entry and what is your romance with that particular time. You know, and also too, a lot of people talked about the Miseducation and said I loved it at the time, but because I was going through something, but when I listen through it now, it takes me to a place I don't really like, or it takes me to a place that I think I've outgrown. You know, thank God I'm not in that place. Like, I love Aretha, but I don't want to love nobody like that. I really don't. That doesn't have anything to do with Aretha not being classic. I simply don't want to love nobody that hard. You know, Mary's most classic album to me is
My Life?
My Life.
Okay.
But Mary, you know, she's the artist I've actually interviewed the most. Like, I've done like 3 cover stories on Mary J. Blige, to the point where I was like, I can't write another story on Mary. Like, it's too close at this point.
Yeah.
It's her best album. She was the most miserable at the time. And she, you know, I'm not speculating, she said that. It is still the one to me that like, is the album that I could put on and just get lost in. Because that pain, that like that scratchiness, unpolished to her voice, that Yonkers Project concrete broken glass shit is like the soundtrack to who I was as a girl. Is it classic to me? Yeah. But it's the pain in it that allows me to work through some things. And so when I do things like that, even as a music journalist, if I do some ranking thing and they ask me to weigh in, it's a fun debate. It's a fun thing to say, oh, okay, that's your top 5, what about Big? Oh, okay, who are we gonna take off the list? But I don't think there's any kind of empirical, sociological standard that Black people should have or should adopt when it comes to music. I think we have to sort of agree that we're not gonna agree there, and it's great that we don't.
Everybody, please. Well, first, let me just say, Joan, you are a gift to all of us. And so often in hip hop, the labor of Black women does get ignored or erased or minimized. And it's important for us to tell you here and now that we appreciate you and love you. And that not just journalism, but hip hop itself would not be the same without you. And we give thanks to you, and we give thanks for you. Can everybody give Joan Morgan a round of applause?